You're listening to The Money Hour with your host, Tina Mitchell, on Alternative Talk 1150 AM. Now, back to the show with local mortgage expert, Tina Mitchell.
You're listening to The Money Hour on 1150 AM KKNW, the Saturday, September 3rd, Labor Day weekend show. You can also listen to my show podcast, Facebook premiere, or catch me on my show YouTube channel. I'm your host and local mortgage expert, Tina Mitchell. And I have Charles here. And yes, I'm very excited to have him in studio. So Charles, before we get started with my questions I have for you, I'm going to share a little bit about you to my listeners. So Charles is an insurance broker with Goosehead Insurance and has been in the insurance industry since 2013. His primary focus is helping families find the best possible option for their personal auto, home, umbrella, flood, earthquake policies. He has extensive experience working with real estate developers, investors as well. With a focus on client education, Charles wants you to feel confident and comfortable with your insurance policy. His goal is to make insurance as easy, quick, and affordable as possible. All right, Charles. So again, really excited to have a conversation here with you. First time that I've had you on the show and just very excited. So Charles, insurance companies don't typically cover damages for earthquake. Has that changed? And do you have a normal homeowner's insurance policy that covers earthquake insurance?
Yeah, great question, Tina. That's something we mentioned to any person who's buying a new property or we're doing a review on their insurance with them for their home. We always mention, hey, earthquake's not covered. We live in the Pacific Northwest. We kind of gauge their level of concern about that. Some people are really worried about it. Other people aren't. But your base home policy, unless you specifically ask them to, they're not going to include earthquake coverage on there. Some companies, they do have the capability to let you just add it on. Other companies don't have that, and so you'll have to go get a little separate standalone earthquake policy to go along with your home insurance. So yeah, if it's a concern for someone and they're not sure if they have it, they can probably check their current policy and call their agent. So they'll either add it on to what they have or go get something separate to go along with their current home policy.
Yeah, doing mortgages and working with people through their homeowners insurance, I have to say that 1 out of even more than 100 I ever see get earthquake insurance. It's kind of shocking. All right. So how do you get earthquake insurance and what does it cost? Because, I've seen drastically difference in cost for earthquake insurance. So can you share a little bit on that?
Yeah, it's kind of all over the place, unfortunately. It really depends on a lot of factors for the home, like the age, the build style, the local geography. Is there any sort of slope involved with the local terrain, and where in the state or where in the city it's located? So in general, I would say most earthquake insurance is going to be maybe on the low end, like $400 per year for a home in our Seattle area, all the way up to maybe $1,000 or $1,200 a year, depending again on the size and the age of the home. But the good news is if you're living on the east side of the mountains over in Spokane, Walla Walla, Yakima, you can get earthquake insurance for just a few $100 a year because to my knowledge, the entire bedrock over there is basalt and the earthquake risk is a lot lower on that side of the state. So
really,
yeah, it's unfortunately, it's something we don't know about the pricing until I go check it out for someone on a given home. So yeah, I always give people a ballpark, but we have to check everything one by one just to check.
Well, if you're in Eastern Washington right now listening to the show, you need to give Charles a call and talk about what it would look like for earthquake insurance, because that is cheap for earthquake insurance for people over on the east of the mountains. So does your home have to be retrofitted for an earthquake to get an earthquake insurance policy?
Good question. So no, they don't. Some companies might. Well, I'll put it this way. In general, no. But I would definitely recommend that if you do have a house here, you go check out to see if it has been retrofitted, if you did it yourself, and then check out what that might cost to have that done. I know a number of years ago, there was I think it was the New York Times or something, article came out about earthquake in our area, and then everyone was a mad rush to get that done. And so there's a huge backlog for contractors. I don't think that's the situation now. So if you want to have that done, I think thankfully there's probably not too bad of a wait. But yeah, it'd be something I would just personally recommend every homeowner to do.
Absolutely. So, Charles, who needs flood insurance, and what does that look like as far as um, what it actually covers?
Yeah, so flood insurance is something most people are only really ever going to run into if they're trying to buy a new place. And the lender says, hey, this place is in a high risk flood zone. You need to get flood insurance. And like, oh, well, great. What's that going to cost me?
Mhm.
Um, it, it's one of those things where it's a pretty straightforward policy, but it's not the most intuitive thing. To get flood insurance, it's a separate standalone policy. So it's not going to be something you can get on your home insurance. It's a thing that goes along with it. And it really covers two things: the house and the stuff in the house. And then that's pretty much it. They do give you money if you get displaced from your home due to flood damage. That's called loss of use. That's just built into the policy, but really it's for your contents in your home. The reason I mentioned flood's not super intuitive is because flood damage is specifically going to protect you against water that comes across your property boundary line. So it's not originating from within your home or within your property. And for you to be able to use your flood policy, you either have to have your home and a neighbor get affected, or if you're the only home that's affected, you have to have at least 2 acres of previously dry land be inundated with water as well. So there's a
Wow.
few stipulations around it, which makes it kind of clunky for folks. But
Yeah.
in general, yeah, for most people in our area, to only come across it if the home they're buying is in a high risk zone and the lender brings it up.
Yeah, and from the mortgage side, it's if you're listening to the show and you're looking at buying a property, most likely that's going to be in a flood zone, you need to talk with your mortgage consultant, make sure that they understand that, because typically they're not ever putting that in. And if you're going up to your maximum debt to income ratio, that can actually flip the whole thing when it comes up that you need to get flood insurance through that flood cert. So you want to make sure that you're letting your mortgage professional know that ahead of time, so you're not going to get stuck in the middle of closing, because that's going to be bad if now you no longer qualify to purchase that home once you're under contract. So make sure that you're talking with your insurance agent and what that's going to cost if you're in a flood zone. So will insurance cover floods in basement from heavier than normal Seattle rain, or does it have to be unique to a weather event?
Yeah, so the nice thing is there's no requirement of like having a named storm or anything like that. Kind of as I mentioned before, there's only a few stipulations. The water has to be an outside source, cross your boundary line. So yeah, if we have an example where there's super heavy rain and maybe just the drainage or the topography of your local spot in your neighborhood isn't the best for some reason, and that causes water damage, as long as, like I mentioned before, it affects you and a neighbor, that's something you can use. With regards to the coverage for the basement contents, in general, there will be no coverage for anything you have in the basement unless you specifically add it on to your flood
Really?
policy. So that's an optional thing. It's good to check
Okay.
if you have that. And some basements in the area, they have, it's unfinished. They have a washer and dryer and the furnace down there and the water tank, and that's about it. Other folks obviously have a very nice, fully finished basement
Yeah.
with lots of stuff in there. So if that's your situation and you're at all worried about flood damage, that's something to check out on your policy.
Yeah, that's a big deal, and that's why it's so important. This is why I have the show, is I bring the best of the best in this show each and every week, because I want to connect you, if you're listening to the show, with people that are the best of the best, and they can really navigate, because there's big mistakes that can be made in the insurance arena, and that's a nightmare, just a nightmare in itself, to have to deal with a claim, but then find out when you're trying to work through that claim that you're not covered is can be devastating. So, Charles, it might seem a little bit odd to ask about tornadoes in the Pacific Northwest, but we do have them here sometimes. So, does normal insurance cover tornado damage at all?
Yeah, the good news is your normal base home policy is going to cover it, because what they provide coverage for is windstorm, and a tornado is just a really bad, souped up, fast windstorm, so that's automatically
Um,
covered. Yeah, and it is kind of weird. I had to go check this out. We've actually had a few, I think 1 or 2 tornadoes in the state, basically the last couple of years. They've all been very low category, very brief. I think I
uh-huh.
even found a YouTube video of someone's at a ball game and they saw a tornado form in Spokane. It was crazy.
Wow.
So yeah, I mean, they do happen and they're very brief, but they have caused a few disasters here recently.
So good. It's part of your policy, and you don't have to pay extra for it.
Exactly.
So, if you must evacuate for potential of a natural disaster like a tornado or wildfire, you talked a little bit about expenses getting covered. Is your living expenses and relocation costs and all of that, is that a standard that's going to be covered?
Yeah, it should be something that every home policy has built in. They'll call it loss of use. They might call it additional living expenses, but they should have a coverage on there called that. And you want to make sure that if they have a dollar figure on there, that what they have sounds like it's something you could use if you had to spend, worst case scenario, 8, 10, 12 months out of your house. So if you have a major disaster happen at your home and it's unlivable and you have to be somewhere else, all those expenses with restaurants and your Airbnb of choice and relocation costs, your insurance company should pay for, but make sure that what they have for you sounds like enough if you guys had to pack everything up and be somewhere else for a year.
Yeah, my husband caught our kitchen on fire and we lived in a
no.
hotel for 9 months. Went from a 4,100 square foot home to, I don't know, a 300, 400 square foot hotel room with our dog. So that was quite the experience, but feel fortunate that I had insurance. So, and great insurance for that. So what should you look for in your policy to make sure that you have your rebuilding cost or sufficient with changing all the changes that are happening with construction costs, just like everything else going up?
Yeah, that's probably one of the number one things I've talked to folks here recently if they're doing like a refinance or they've owned their home for 5, 10 years, is we always check what their rebuild cost is going to be for their home. So if you look at your home policy, if you have one now, the very first thing on there should say something like coverage A or dwelling coverage, and it'll have a big number. I would say a good example of an average home here in Seattle might be $400,000 or $500,000 rebuild. So they're not looking at what the market value is for the house. They're looking at what's it going to cost to have contractors come in there, rebuild it just the way it is right now. And we've been seeing that number go up. So with inflation and supply chain issues, those numbers have just been going up and up and up. So when I see a client has an existing policy, we do a review. I'm like, wow, we need to bump this up by $50,000 for you. Good news, it's $30 or $50 a year more, but that's a lot of money if you did have a major loss at your property.
So would you say a call to action for anybody that's listening right now, Charles, because construction costs are up, that you need to check with your insurance agent and make sure that you've got enough coverage?
Definitely. Yeah. If it's been a while since you looked at your policy, I would say more than 3 years, definitely just have them, hey, can you just quickly rerun the estimate for me and let me know if I have enough coverage? Yeah. Some companies do build in an inflation guard in their policy, so it does go up by a couple percent every year, which is nice. But even on top of that, maybe need a bit more. So ask your agent, definitely.
Yeah. And there's been a lot of changes in the insurance arena. I was having a conversation with Charles before we opened up the show. And as your host of the Money Hour, call to action is to reach out to the show. I want to get you connected with Charles. He can do a consultation review analysis of your current policy and let you know if he can save you money. It's always it's good to check and make sure that you have the best possible coverage at the lowest possible cost, especially now with all these changes going on. So, Charles, can you explain what an umbrella policy is for people and what does that typically cost?
Yeah, this is one of the big things we always mention to folks as well. I would compare it to kind of like getting cancer insurance. An umbrella policy is something I hope you never need to use. It's going to kind of cover you for big catastrophic events. And it's also really affordable for what it gives you. So that's what I like to compare it to. But essentially, it's if you have a situation where there's a big car accident or somebody gets hurt on your property and they are coming after you and they say, hey, I need compensation. I have pain and suffering. I have, who knows, PTSD, medical bills, all that stuff. And it's very, very expensive. And your underlying policy runs out of money to pay for it. Normally in that situation, you would have to come up with the difference. So if your auto policy stops paying at $100,000, when someone has $400,000 of medical bills, now you would be on the hook for $300,000. An umbrella policy's sole job is to stop that. So they provide coverage starting usually at $1 million and they go up from there. So in that situation, your umbrella policy would turn on after your auto policy ran out of money and it would pay that $300,000 difference. And you, financially speaking, would be a-okay. I don't know if this is something that Samantha and folks like her talk about as well, because if you have a great financial plan, can get derailed by one bad claim or one bad lawsuit.
Yeah, absolutely. Less than a minute left in the show. And I know you can answer this question in probably one word. Who needs umbrella policy?
basically at this point in our area, everyone.
Everyone. So there's another call to action. If you're listening to the show, you need to make sure that you have an umbrella policy. Everyone needs it. It is, like Charles says, it's very inexpensive to have it, and you want to make sure that you're set up, and hopefully you don't get cancer. As Charles says, it's like that, but the reality is a lot of people do. So with an umbrella policy, it's not going to help you on the cancer side of it, but it's going to make sure that you're covered with what your insurance doesn't pick up. So everyone needs an umbrella policy. Charles, thank you so much for being here today on my virtual show and sharing with my listeners. I appreciate you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Tina. It's great talking with you.